Everything's better with butter. In this lesson, we'll learn a new mixing technique, and then we'll make two shapes, non-tear and a braided loaf. This recipe is different from our master recipe in that it has twice the amount of sugar and 3 times the amount of butter. We're also going to substitute milk for water. All of these are tenderizing agents. They're going to make a nice soft bread, but they also add bulk to the dough and tend to weigh it down. So we're going to offset that a little bit by adding a little bit more yeast and giving more time for the dough to rise and for the final proof. The result is going to be amazing. We're going to use a stand mixer because fat can really impede the gluten development. So what we're going to do is mix a dough and get that gluten developed first, and then add the butter in. And you can do it by hand, but it's pretty messy. So I prefer the machine for this particular dough. So let's get started. I like to put the liquid in the bottom when I'm using a stand mixer. This is different than when I'm mixing by hand. What I find is when I put flour in the bottom of the mixer, there's this pocket in the divot of the bowl where flour gets stuck and it's really hard to get incorporated. So I'll pour our milk in first, and this can be cold from the fridge. One of the differences when mixing with a stand mixer is that you're generating a lot of heat through friction. So your liquid doesn't have to be warm. That's fine to come out of the cool fridge. And I'm using whole milk for this recipe, but 2% or skim would work fine as well. Next, I'm going to put the flour in. And again, I'm starting with that lower end of my range. And then we have our sugar and our salt and our yeast. And I'm going to turn this on slow speed just to get everything combined. You'll see I'm using the dough hook, but I do have the paddle attachment handy. If I feel like the dough hook just continues to swim around in the bowl and isn't picking the dough up, I'll start with the paddle to form a cohesive dough, and then I'll switch back to the dough hook for the kneading phase. It does take just a minute to get everything all combined. So I'm going to stop the mixer and give it a little scrape down. And this is when I'm going to determine, do I need to switch attachments or do I think this is going to work? I think with a little scrape down, this dough hook is going to work. Let's give it a try. All right, we're almost all together. I'm just going to stop the mixer one more time and give it just another scrape down because I have one edge that's not incorporating. Great, now our dough has all come together in one cohesive mass. And this is where I have to determine, do I need to adjust the consistency with any of my remaining flour? So you can see it's really kind of soft and soupy right now, very sticky and slack. So I'm going to put a little bit more of that flour in. Okay, let's take a look here. The dough has come together into a ball. I'm just going to give the sides and the bottom a scrape down. The texture feels really good now. It's still a little tacky, but it's not at all slack. It's really holding together now. So now we're going to mix this on medium-low speed for about 3 minutes, and this is considered the kneading phase. So if you're doing this by hand, you would use that same fold, roll, turn method. The dough still needs another minute, but I do want to scrape the bottom of the bowl. Sometimes you'll notice you have a piece of dough that just seems to get lodged into the bottom, and you want to Make sure that everything gets well incorporated. You can also scrape the hook attachment down as well. All right, now we see that the dough has really come together into one mass, and it's kind of slapping around the side of the bowl now. It starts to travel up the hook a little bit. This is telling us that the dough is developed and ready for our butter addition. So we're taking it about to the same place that we would if we were hand mixing any of our other recipes. So, however, this loaf isn't finished yet. Right now it does feel sticky because it doesn't have any oil or butter in it yet. It still has that really tacky feel to it. But if we flour our fingers, there's definitely a lot of bounce, a lot of spring to this dough. With all of the hand mixing that we've done so far, I haven't mentioned a cautionary tale with the KitchenAid. That is, don't turn it up and walk away. It's really hard to do damage to dough by hand. That hand mixing and kneading technique is a very gentle motion. It's a much more aggressive mixing in the mixer. That dough hook smacks the dough around the sides of the bowl. It can overdevelop the dough, and it can start to break down the gluten. If you let it mix for 15 minutes, you might be in big trouble. Also, you're going to be generating that heat through friction, so you don't want to start with ingredients that are too warm to begin with. Okay, now with the mixer running, I'm going to go ahead and put our butter in. At first, it's going to look like a greasy mess, but then after another couple of minutes of mixing on medium-low speed, it's going to come together again, and I'm going to be looking for a gluten window. And that just means that I'm going to be able to take out a little piece of dough and stretch it so that it's translucent without breaking. Okay, now can you see why I didn't want to do this by hand? This is looking great though. I just need to scrape down the sides of the bowl to make sure all of that butter is getting incorporated. All right, I'm going to give the bowl one more scrape down just to make sure all of that butter is completely dispersed and we don't lose any of it to the sides of our bowl. We're getting really close. Did you just hear that popping sound? That's a sound that our dough is probably really close. So let's take a look and see if we can stretch this gluten window. So I'm going to flour my hands and take out a little bit of dough and flour the dough as well. If you have really sticky fingers, it's hard to pull a gluten window. So then I'm stretching it out to see if I can get it very thin without tearing. And see how thin that is? You can almost read the newspaper through it. So this is telling me that our dough is done mixing. So I'm going to take it out of our mixing bowl and I'll place it into another bowl, cover it up with plastic wrap, and let it rise for about 2 hours. Again, to reiterate why we changed up the mixing technique. All of that extra fat can really impede the gluten development. So we got a strong gluten network built before we added the butter and then added the butter. And it just made it a little bit simpler in the mixer rather than doing it on the bench by hand. Our butter-enriched bread has risen. It's nice and soft and marshmallowy, and now it's ready to shape. We're going to explore two shapes today, and that is a three-stranded braid and a non-tear shape. So first of all, I'll take the dough out of the bowl. And we'll divide it in half. This half I'm just going to set aside for now to make our braid with. But this half I'm going to do our non-tear shape. And that's simply dividing it into 8 pieces, making round rolls, and placing them into a loaf pan. So I'm going to do this by eye, but if you feel like you have a hard time getting fairly even pieces, then you can go ahead and scale them. So I'll just cut it in half, and then again in half and in half. And that's how I can get fairly even pieces. All right, let's make some round rolls. So this is going to start off just like we did for the round whole grain loaf. We're going to take one piece of dough and pull the edges and bring them into the center to make a little purse or a little pouch. We're going to pinch it together, and now we want to make sure that we don't have any flour on our surface because we need a little grab between the dough and the bench. So go ahead and clean it off. But do have some flour handy. If your palm starts to stick to the dough, you'll want to dip your hand in some flour. So I've placed this seam side down on my surface, and what I want to do is make it very round and symmetrical and increase the surface tension by pushing the surface of the dough under. And this is going to happen as I rotate the dough. So I have my pinky and my thumb on the bench, and I've created a cage around the dough. And now I'm just going to push down with my pinky and up with my thumb. So you can see the dough is actually rotating, and what's happening is this skin is getting pushed under, and so we're getting this very round, tight ball like this. So a lot of spring to it. You can see this unshaped piece. When I press down on it, it holds my fingerprint. But when we've done a really good job shaping it, you just press and it will bounce right back. Let me show you that one more time. We're just going to bring it all to the center. Put the seam side down. Remember, your thumb and your pinky stays on the bench, and rotate using the palm of your hand. And we just place them in the pan like so, 2 rows of 4 rolls each. So I'm going to finish these off now. Now for our 3-stranded braid. First, we're going to cut our piece of dough into 3 equal pieces. Again, use your scale if you have a hard time getting them fairly even. And with each piece, we are going to make a tight rope. So I'll degas the dough, and then I'm going to fold it over. So I'm building up some surface tension so I have a nice smooth rope, one that doesn't have too many wrinkles on the outside. If you ever get stuck to your surface, go ahead and use your bench knife to loosen it. So that's 1 strand. Here's our second strand. Don't worry if they're not even yet. We're still going to roll them out a bit. And our third strand. Now we don't want to have any bench flour, but you do want to flour your hands a little bit. Again, we want to have a little bit of grab between the dough and the bench right now as we elongate our strands slightly. So we're just going to roll over it. Don't think about pulling the dough out, just think about gentle downward pressure. Think back to when you were a kid and you were making Play-Doh snakes. Just press down on the dough a little bit. All right, and then we want to get all of our strands to be fairly even. All right, this is a little fat here. I want to taper that off just a little bit. Now that we have our 3 strands rolled out to their full length, we're going to coat them with flour. This is going to help in the braiding process so they don't adhere to each other as we're trying to braid the dough. So we've got a light coating of flour, and now we're going to change the orientation. So we've got our 3 strands the long way. So we've got one in the middle, and then with the one on the outside, we're going to make a K and a backwards K. And we're going to do a technique where we braid from the center out rather than braiding from the top down. I feel like this gives a prettier, more symmetrical look. So this is just a simple braid. So we're going to take the outside of one of the pieces of dough and bring it over the center, and then do the same with the other side. Over and then to the inside. Over and to the inside of the opposite piece. Over and to the inside. And you just repeat this until you get to the end and squish your strands together. Now this is the slightly tricky part. To do the other side, you actually have to flip the dough upside down. So just with one confident motion, flip the dough, and then we're going to take the outside, bring it up and over the center to the inside, over to the inside, and continue down to the bottom of the loaf. And when you run out of dough, just squish everything together, flip it back to its original side, and voila, you have a beautiful 3-strand braid. We'll place this braid onto our parchment-lined sheet pan, and we're going to cover this up with plastic wrap, just like our non-tear shape. That will get covered too, and they're both going to rise for about an hour and a half. Our butter-enriched bread is proofed and ready to bake. It's marshmallowy, soft, and risen. But we're going to add an extra step. We are going to brush some egg wash on it so it gives it a beautiful shine and some color. I like to make egg wash with a whole egg. So I just beat up a whole egg with a tablespoon of water and a little pinch of salt. And then you just want to be careful when you apply the egg wash, that you're gentle so that you don't deflate the bread, and that you do a good thorough job, but you're not too sloppy because we don't want to have any scrambled egg. So just make sure that you dab off your pastry brush a little bit if you have a lot of egg wash on there. Same with the braid. So we've put a lot of effort into making this beautiful bread, and this is just the finishing touch. So you want to try to get a nice, thorough, and even brush all over it. We're doing this for shine, for beautiful golden color. If you have any little drips on the side, you just want to go over them again. And then one additional garnish that I like to do is putting a little Swedish pearl sugar on the top. So I'm going to do this one on the braid today, but you could do it on either the non-tear shape or the braid. And it's just this nice little crunchy sugar that adds just a visual element, a little sweet crunch on top. So these are ready to go into the oven. We're going to put them in our preheated 375-degree oven, and they're going to bake for about 25 to 30 minutes. Remember, with all of that butter in there, we're going to get a brown loaf. It's going to start browning a little bit earlier than our master recipe. We're going to keep an eye on it because the total bake time is going to be a little bit less. Now that you've mastered that 3-strand braid and you want a really special shape to impress your friends and family, I'm going to teach you how to make a 6-strand braid. So you're going to start off just like you did for the 3-strand braid, except this time you'll cut half of your dough into 6 pieces and then elongate each into a strand. So now we have our 6 strands all set out, and we are going to pinch them together at the top. We're going to arrange them so in the center there's 2 pairs, and then we have single strands on each end. Our first move is to cross those single strands across each other. Then what we're going to do is bring one of the outside strands into the center and take the opposite up and over. Then we'll do it from the other side. This strand comes inside next to this pair, and the outside strand goes up and over. And we'll repeat this process. So this strand comes to the inside, and the opposite one goes up and over. Back to the inside, up and over. When you can't do it anymore, when you get to the end, just pinch all of your strands together, give it a little roll, and tuck that extra dough underneath. And you can do the same on the other side. Just give it a little roll and tuck it underneath. And now we have our beautiful 6-stranded braid. Our butter-enriched bread is out of the oven and it looks fantastic. It is shiny, golden, luscious looking. Some of the signs to look for with this braided loaf are that you see browning in the cracks of the strands right here. This section right here, you don't want it to be too pale. So don't worry if it's getting a little bit dark on the outside. Look into these crevices to make sure that you're seeing a lot of browning. I love the shiny, glistening look of this bread. Just to note, you can egg wash the other recipes as well. Our master recipe, the whole grain recipe, you could egg wash those if you wanted a shinier look, or something that I really love to do is to brush the finished baked loaf, still hot out of the oven, slather that with melted butter. It adds to the flavor. It also helps prolong the shelf life. So let's go ahead and cut into one of these loaves. So I've cooled it on a wire rack so the air was circulating all around it. This is so soft and so tender and has this luscious feel to it. It smells great. I can't wait to bite into this. I hope you all feel empowered to bake. I hope you feel inspired to buy a bag of flour and get your hands into the dough. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to answer your questions. And I'm really excited to see your photos. I want to know what you're baking. I'm Amber Eisler, and this has been King Arthur Flour's Essentials of Bread Baking.